Elevate online session. And we started these sort of periodic virtual discussions just as a chance to bring faculty together to share ideas in a very informal and collaborative setting. We kind of wanted to simulate the experience of just having a hallway where your colleagues are down the hall and you can pop over and ask them a question or share something that you're working on and get their feedback. So that's really the purpose of this event. And we know that, you know, you've all either recently adjusted to teaching online and very likely will be continuing to teach online in the summer and possibly even into the fall. So we wanted to create this as a forum to kind of support you all as you look to, you know, enhance your online course and better connect with students. So I'll go ahead and give some quick introductions to my team. So Vanessa Franklin is our lovely host. And I also got my colleague in marketing, Shannon O'Donnell. And then today we also have two featured faculty who are joining us, and they're going to be sharing some specific tips and techniques that they have used in teaching online. And I will let Gloria introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Gloria Starnes. I'm a professor of teaching at Iowa State University.
And Dan Collins.
Hi, I'm Dan Collins. I am a chemistry teaching faculty here at Texas A&M College Station.
Thank you both. So I thought I'd kick it off by asking a couple kind of like warm-up questions. I know when you all registered, we asked you a little bit more about, you know, to reflect on your term and if there's anything that you would have done differently, and also how you use data. So thank you for sharing with us. This is definitely something we can use to help fuel the discussion. And what a lot of folks said was that they aren't in a period of regularly using data, but that they want to do more. Many of you said, you know, admitted, I don't use data as much as I should. I'd like to know more about when to do so, or I probably use it too infrequently. So I thought I'd kind of check with you all and ask you to share. And I think, Vanessa, I believe we've taken everybody off mute. But if we haven't done so, Vanessa can unmute the line. I'd like to know if, you know, in a perfect world, what data would you have at your fingertips?
You got a quiet group for today, Emily.
Silence is golden.
That's from Alex itself. Can you be specific about what this means? What?
Sure. So I know a handful of you are using platforms like Connect or Alex, so there's certainly data available in the reports and insights features in those platforms. So if that's something that you're using regularly and that you're, you know, finding to be impactful, that's definitely, I think, something that we can talk about. But also if there's anything that you maybe don't have access to that you would like, or you'd like to have it more readily available. So really it could be from, you know, a specific platform, or it could just be something that, you know, you would like to have access to, but you don't currently have. All right, well, I will go ahead and let's give a shout out to, I think, Joey. You had shared with us that you would like to use more data. Is there kind of any specific, like we said, you know, sometimes you have to go digging for it. It's not always at your fingertips. How do you kind of envision, like in a perfect world, what would you be able to access right away?
Well, in terms of data, like what's really been important, especially during this transition, has been the time and topic reports from Alex, because that really just kind of gave me an idea in terms of ascertaining I hate to say the veracity of students saying that I don't understand, or, you know, in terms of comprehension and the time that they've spent with the topic. It's also really kind of helped me kind of get an idea in terms of trends of the topics that the majority of students spend the most time on. So a lot of times students will not verbalize, or they don't think to verbalize, or know, like, this is exactly what I've been having my biggest problems with. Because a lot of students tend not to say anything, especially if they are in a class setting, when they're asked to, if I ask, you know, who has questions about anything, I find that a lot of students, it takes some time for them to do that. And so that's how the time and topics really helped me to get the overall trend of, you know, where students are really having their issues.
So Joey, would you say, from what you're saying, it sounds like the time on topic then you use to figure out where the students are struggling the most, or are there other ways that you also are using that?
Well, I also use it for attendance. I use it for attendance, but generally for where students are struggling the most. Because the other aspect is that um, when I have students that, you know, are spending an inordinate amount of time on a particular topic, I also have to ask the question: is it really the topic, or is it just being able to, you know, use the interface? So what exactly is, you know, what part of that is, why are they taking so much time with that? And so some students have told me that it just took me a long time just to get the right answer, because I would put an answer down, but even though I think it's right, Alex is saying it's not right. And so they're spending time trying to figure out little things like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joey. And another question that kind of comes to mind, I'm curious if, you know, since everything sort of shifted to an entirely online format, was the time and topic report, did you sort of change how you use that report? Or did you find that it, you know, you started to rely more on it, kind of in the absence of those face-to-face interactions with students?
I relied a lot more on it, more so than I would normally have had it we not been in this new reality. So it, you know, that data helped me to kind of focus and just really having a better understanding in terms of what was going on with students. A lot of times, if I was in a regular class setting, I would have so many other responsibilities and things going on that I really wouldn't have time to pay attention to it. But this time, because, you know, I was limited in terms of interaction with students, it did, you know, I was pleasantly surprised that it was something that I got a lot of use out of.
Hey, Joey, it's Dan. When it comes to something like that, now that you've opened up Pandora's box, and we all hope for a post-COVID era sometime within the near future or 6 months, is there a way now that you can implement what you've learned in this, let's just call it a triage era, that you're going to now focus in on when you actually do go back to the class setting?
Yeah, I think what I'm going to do now is a lot of times, and the complaints that a lot of students have had is that I really, you know, we covered a topic in this amount of time, and then we moved on to the next topic. And so I still didn't understand what was going on then. So now that I have, you know, I'm able to kind of look at those topics. One of the other resources that I found were the videos. So what I would do is I would do um, a staggered class where I would just put videos that really keyed in on whatever the majority of students had. So I would make that available. And then when I do tutoring, you know, in a lot of cases, if I see that that's where the most time was spent, I would kind of create some more supplemental materials around those things. So that's how I plan to use it. Because what I did find was that when I when students did want to do a virtual chat and they had questions for homework. It was those things where they spent the most time on.
Sure. Thank you, Joey. I'm curious too, I just want to open it up to other folks on the line if, kind of in the shift to online, if you did find yourself, using any specific reports or information, or maybe even some sort of outside tool that you previously hadn't used that, maybe pleasantly surprised you or you found to be impactful. I have a note here. I think, Patricia, you shared that you would like to facilitate more small group discussions to increase student engagement.
Yes, I have chemistry classes of about 300 when we were in person. We were required, I had live lectures, but we were required to record everything. So only about 75 of them came. And what I had thought I would do at the beginning of all this was try to tag certain one of them to certain students in smaller groups to come virtually through Zoom to talk to me about chemistry or just whatever was going on. And to tell you the truth, I was so overwhelmed by learning Zoom and media captioning and everything else that I never got to do that. So that's something I would like to put into the fall if we're online, is just like I would have smaller groups in my office hours, I would like to have smaller groups virtually this fall if we're online.
Great. I have a comment and a question on that. So I'll be curious, Patricia, to hear how you use that with Zoom, because I know in Zoom you can create these smaller groups. So I know as we're transitioning into Zoom as a company, we're starting to learn a little bit more about those. So please, let's continue this conversation after that, whether it's with me or Emily or Michael. I think that's really important and something a lot of people are going to be asking about. And then the other element is when you're talking about the recorded lecture, do you ever pull the data on how many students are watching those videos or looking at the timestamps of where they drop off? Do you have access to that type of data? And would that be helpful if you're not?
What I did keep track of, I could see the views for each lecture. I don't know if I can, and I didn't even think to look, if I can tell where they're dropping off. Some videos were watched by, it looked like the majority of students, and some of them were not. I could tell just by the number of views whether the entire class had watched them or not.
Patricia, based off of that, this is Dan. Were you using the analytics in YouTube or were you doing it through your LMS?
Through my LMS, I was using something called Kaltura on our Canvas. We use Canvas. And so it was just giving me, I could just look at it in my personal media gallery and see how many views there were.
That's one of the new things that, when Emily brought up the question about new technology I use, I always would post videos, but I would always use the YouTube analytics. So you could never tell if it was one student twice or two students once, where now I was able through my Blackboard to actually track it to say, oh, this student has clicked this link 2 or 3 times. So that was another arsenal that I brought in to say, oh, this student's either wanting to watch this a little bit or, oh, they wanted to watch it a couple of times. And it sounds like you were doing the same thing.
Well, I was looking at total views and I wondered, are these some students watching it multiple times, or is really 500 students watching at one time? So I don't know if I can get that kind of information, but something I'll look into. If
on Canvas, you should be able for the assignment to do an individual or itemized report where, if you have, let's just say you're with your 200 students, it will list and normally do a 1, a 0, or a 2 in a little box and say, oh, Shannon watched this twice. Emily watched this once while Dan did not watch this video. And you can actually change the time in there to say, I want to put it on the day that the video was put up. versus what was it in the week, because we were told us to have a lot of flexibility and say, you cannot force your students in the COVID era to say, watch this on Monday. You have to give them a 48 or 72-hour window. So Canvas,
Right.
in their versatility, you should be able to do that fairly easily.
That's good to know, because like I said, I was just hanging on, trying to get through the semester in one piece, which did happen. So yeah, it's nice to know I can go back and get more information like that then.
No, I know exactly how you feel about the somewhat sinking ship. So,
Hey, I'd like to, Dan, can I nominate you to maybe put together some screenshots
That'd be great.
of,
Yeah.
of how you can do that in Canvas?
I use Blackboard because we are actually converting to Canvas over that, but I think for the most part it's fairly similar in many cases. If not, I can reach out to one of my colleagues that does use Canvas on campus and see what I can do and look in that.
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be
we
great. Thanks.
We can definitely put something together and send a little bit of a recap, since a lot of you, I believe, are using Canvas, and it could be very similar to get that information in other LMSs as well. All right, well, thank you. I will turn it over then to Dan. He's going to walk us through some examples of some of the data that he uses and speak a little bit more about how he uses it and sort of what it looked like in an online setting.
Okay, let me go ahead and get the PowerPoint up there. I should see it there. All right. So in one of the nice things for those of you that are ALEKS users, I am predominantly an ALEKS user. We've been using it for general chemistry, at least I have, since I've been at Texas A&M. To let everyone know, at least on here, I'm probably one of the longer time ALEKS users. I was one of a graduate student of a faculty member who started using ALEKS long ago, back in 2009. And kind of each time as I've been working, I think the biggest benefit of ALEKS is the reporting and the data that comes from there. But it's nice to hear from Joey and Patricia just say, sometimes I don't even know where to begin. So the nice part about this is this is the typical faculty homepage. This is actually my homepage from this past spring. I have removed the student identification for the obvious thing. But the first time an ALEKS user gets on here, this is the screen they see. And this is what I will tell you as a bad ALEKS user. This is the only screen I thought there was for pretty much the first 6 years that I ever used this. And one of the implementation specialists over the year goes, Dan, don't you notice those two little arrows over on the right side? And I went, oh God, what are those? And the neat part about it is this is kind of pulling back that curtain in a very nice Wizard of Oz way. If I were to click on those two arrows, I end up on this screen, and this screen is arguably the holy grail of what I use for my students, especially in a digital era. This takes all of the reports and starts to itemize them, for me at least, into useful information. So the ready to learn is actually something that's very beneficial for me, especially if I'm not seeing my students, because I want those numbers as high as possible. That means that my students are grouped and prepared all for the same thing. I don't want to see a whole lot of students lagging back behind a certain topic. So as you guys brought up of, oh, I don't know if they're watching the videos. I could tell immediately if students were watching videos because then they were starting to group together. If I started to have a group lagging behind, I could see that very easily in the ready to learn yellow box. The attempted,
Dan,
yeah, go ahead.
Can I jump in for 2 seconds? So for those of you that are on here that are working with engineering, we know that ALEKS is not something that's available to you for most classes. We have a math prep for statics, but that's it for the engineering curriculum. So as you're listening to Dan, I just ask you to consider, is there something that you're seeing here that this would be an added feature that you think would be really helpful? Or is there some other way we can get those analytics so that if we get off this call and you say, hey, Shannon, this was great, I loved this, then I can go back to our team and find out, is there a way we can get this in Connect if I don't know the answer immediately? So I just wanted you guys to pull that whole concept together a little bit.
Well, and another way with Shannon as well is that some of you may be even using homework systems that are completely different, and the data might be there, it's just labeled different or the terminology is different. ALEKS uses really specific data and specific terminology that if you go, oh, I really like that bit of data, in most homework systems, you can find it. It's just having to kind of delve through it a little bit in many ways. So one of the big things for me, and I know as a faculty member, swallowing our pride and saying, hey, we got to do a notch better for our students, this attempted but not yet learned is arguably one of the most important things for me because I want these percentages as low as possible. What happens here is that if they attempt a question, I should have given them the resources to benefit them. If all of a sudden I'm having a bunch of students attempt a question and not get it, it either may be beyond what I've already taught them, or I may have done an awful job teaching them. So for the kind of the purplish pink box, you want those percentages as low as possible. The big difference in ALEKS comes in the red box, and that is the recent assessment. So one of the big things with ALEKS that I use is I will do assessments every other homework. That means it will go back and check to see if they have the long-term retention material. I want those percentages listed in the red box to be as small as possible. The nice part about this is that this will take all of that assessment data for my global population and say, hey, we're concerned about these things. So I actually took this information from mine probably about 3 weeks ago. And you can see that a lot of the topics that my students were missing are thermodynamics and kinetics. Those are literally the first two things that I teach my student. And now in a post-COVID era, God love it, my students probably weren't looking at that stuff at this time. So it's a really nice check for me. And as Joey was talking about earlier, man, I want to be able to give stuff to my TAs or review sessions. That right there, if you see something crawling up 30, 40, 50%, you can immediately squash that by getting a review sheet or having your SI or TA do a review and really kind of get them thinking about tying that specific knowledge in. So the nice part about this is that you can delve into more of the reports, and I want to talk a little bit about the global view and then go to the individual student view, which is, I think, all we want. The ALEKS pie shows the global progress, and even inside the progress report, I can see how much time have they spent total in class, how much time have they spent since the knowledge check, how is their learning rate. Historically, regardless of the homework platform, whether you're using Connect, ALEKS, you could be using Mastering, maybe it's Noon, any of those other products. Historically, students will learn at a rate of about 2 to maybe 3 topics per hour. So the nice thing about it is if you're looking at your online homework system and you see a student who is learning 5, 6, 7, so you see the second person down, I don't have to worry about that individual. That's a person that I'm not truly concerned with. As you see the fourth person down, that would be someone that I may have to send an email nudge to in order to say, hey, you're not spending a whole lot of time on here, but I'm concerned and I really want you to work and focus towards that. So this data is there historically on most homework systems. It's just a matter of trying to itemize and differentiate that. So we can delve into other time and topics. This is actually the global view of my course as we're going through the semester. And I think in a lot of ways, the reason why I like talking and showing this to people is that everybody goes, oh, my students are procrastinating. Guess what? We all do that. We, as faculty members, to students, to teaching assistants, you can literally see every time I have some form of assessment, whether it's an exam, whether it's a midterm, whether it's a final, you will see these spikes. As you see right before the weeks where it says week of 316, the lowest point in my entire semester was when COVID was originally shutting down school and I didn't want my students working on their homework. Let's be honest about it. They needed to focus on what are they going to do with their residence life. So this actually can be super helpful for us to understand of, oh gosh, they have a whole bunch of exams in this. I don't want to have a high period. So this can really help us a lot when dealing with that understanding of a student. So the last thing I really want to show is this pretty much the topic idea of what most homework systems has and what ALEKS can benefit, or what is something that I would definitely want you guys to see in a large global view is just a homework in general. Most online homework systems have something that views like this, and that is how much time they spent, what topics did they do. Where ALEKS actually benefits me and so much is that I can go and see their individual answers, how long they spent on questions, how often they were correct. So in a lot of ways, when Patricia was bringing up of how much time is a student really working on something? And I heard Joey even say, are they giving a question a fair attempt? I can now see that based off of here. So this is one of my better students. He can go and in 1 minute and 12 seconds go through 3 problems and get it correct. This is not a student I need to worry about. But a common student, this is the typical learning walk. This is where Alex benefits me. This is a student that I've now had for 2 semesters, and she can get so disenfranchised and so frazzled very early. And you could see that sitting in this data. So when I would see her in lecture and I'd see her getting frustrated as we were doing an iClicker question, I knew that she would be a person I'd have to kind of go and give a little pick-me-up to. Now, not being in class, I have to do this digitally. So when I would see such things as the early learning walk, where she's missing every question and trying to get the examples and read the explanations, then all of a sudden I'd say, hey, we're going to do an online video session here in a little bit. Let's ask these questions again. And come to find out, I had a dozen students that needed help in that as well. She then all of a sudden felt so empowered. And now you can start to see she did pretty well for the remainder of that day. So one of the things that I really want you guys to see is that there needs to be a balance in all of the data that you look at. One, time is of the essence. In this COVID era, many of you are dealing with living arrangements, family, work, all of that sort of thing. But if I tell you honestly, if you can spend even a half an hour or an hour in the course of a week just looking to see what students, how they're doing, it has been an immense change for me and at least helped me empower some students that I know were struggling greatly. The last thing I want to, for all this data that you guys see, I could literally talk an hour on this, and I'm not going to do that to all these fine people here on the line. But it's one of those things that Alex and all that stuff, the insights reports where it now sends it to you on a Monday, has been a total game changer for me, especially even in the COVID era, because I think we can all agree we're not real sure what day of the week it is anymore. So when I would see that report in my inbox on a Monday saying, hey, that at least allowed me to have a mark in my week going, okay, I need to reboot this. And it made it feel somewhat normal, like being back in the class and where I'd go, okay, I need to send these 5 emails to these students who aren't doing homework. Well, come to find out, one of my students was dealing with a family member who was very ill. I at least got that understanding, and I would have never have gotten that had it not shown up for there. So if you ever have questions when it comes to Alex reporting, how I use this otherwise, please feel free to ask, and especially the ladies here can give out the email and go from there. So thank you for listening. Hopefully you guys picked up a few things that can benefit you for your classes going forward.
Thank you, Dan. And we will, at this point, well, I do want to open it up and see if anybody on the line has any questions for Dan. We'll give him a chance to take a sip. And
give me a chance to make an idiot of myself on recorded camera. Thank you.
Okay, Dan, I've been drinking my coffee, but it's really just in case anybody forgets my name. So
I am always terrified on these things of like dumping it all over the front, and the fact that I wore a white shirt was just totally a miscalculation on my part.
All good. Actually, I did want to ask you about one area we had discussed earlier, and that was around kind of the student reach out and what you observed about, kind of with everything going online and sort of relying on, that paper trail. Like how have you, or what have you observed about the best way to connect with a student if you do need to intervene and maybe nudge them a little bit or ask them, if everything's okay? We talked about how you kind of had shifted your approach, so I was hoping you could share that with the audience.
This is something I struggle with greatly for individuals who've known me for. I'm a blunt force object. I am, why use 10 words when 5 will do, especially if I can put a boot to rear. And in this era, I've had to soften up immensely. And honestly, having a faculty mentor, advisee, just looking over an emails are taken for the most shallow approach. And this is something that my boss has preached to me over the last 6 weeks. Every email you send now, whether you like it or not, is going to be viewed by a parent. Because the scary thing is if I have a student not doing their homework and I go to them by email, Personally, I may be able to have that discussion in front of them in a lecture hall after class going, I need you to do your work. Let's go. And they can sense that my verbiage is coming from a caring side. If I type those exact words by email now, that truly might upset a student. And then all of a sudden, as they're upset not wanting to do the work, then the parent at home who is looking out for their well being is going to say, well, what made my son or daughter upset? They'll see that email and they'll march it up the chain. So going from that idea of, hey, I need you to do this to, hey, I've noticed that you're a little bit behind. Is everything okay? Gives them that opportunity to answer the same question, but it is coming from a complete different wording and verbiage. And Emily, I can tell you over the last 6 weeks, that's been the hardest thing of going, I'm going to type the email the way that I know how to speak it and then go, oh, I can't say that. Delete, 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 delete. And then go, hey, I'm worried about this, or hey, I've noticed this. So many of those just slight changes really change the mentality and the thought process of a student going, oh, he's not looking just specifically at me, but there's something that he has seen that makes him concerned.
Yep, that's so important. Thank you, Dan. All right, so let's turn it over to Gloria.
Thanks, Emily. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Awesome.
Sounds good.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to start sharing with you here. And I have a PowerPoint, just 3 slides. So I know we're all probably PowerPointed to death by this time. But I'll show you what I use most often in McGraw-Hill's utility called Connect. And what it is called the Insight Report, and there's a sub-menu called Dive Deeper. And what you're looking at here is the activity that students are spending on the course assignments, the textbook assignments that I give. And you have time on the horizontal axis and the number of points earned on the vertical axis. And one of the things I've used this for in the past is to look at this quadrant and try to understand why students are putting so little time into the work and why they're earning so few points. And we all know, having taught multiple times, that we have to be careful interpreting this. Could be that this student right here in this bubble is having some things going on at home, and particularly this semester, God only knows what it could be. But when we're on campus, I've used this to maybe reach out to these students in this third quadrant and say, is there something going on, or you're struggling with the material for a reason, because they're spending very little time and not getting very many points. And if you go up to this upper right hand quadrant 1, this student's doing very well, getting a lot of points and spending a lot of time. So I've used this to reach out to students, particularly in this group. And then here's a student that I'm really interested in as well. This particular student is spending pretty good time and not getting a lot of points. They're below the threshold. And the threshold you're looking at here is 70%. So that's a C-. So these students below that line are performing below average. And so I'm interested in particularly this student that's putting in good time but not performing well. And then once I've talked to the students and understand more about why they're performing in this quadrant, it could be they're just not putting the time in. Everything's fine, everything's going well, they're just not doing what they need to do to succeed in the course. And so what I've done in the past is point out to them that that student in the upper right-hand quadrant there, quadrant number 1, one of my best students, of course, he got an A in the course, and looking at the time he's spent, not necessarily the time is the best indication of performance. I have students in quadrant 2 that are doing well, not spending nearly as much time. But what I did notice was that students that are in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2 are looking at the assignments at least a day before they're due, and usually 2 to 3 days before they're due. This student's average time before the assignment was due and looking at it was 4 days. This student down here in quadrant 3 was looking at it less than a day before it was due. 15 hours was the average time the student was opening up the assignments. And so they weren't spending any time thinking about when it was due, what it might encompass, how much time it might take. And keep in mind, this is an entire semester. This is 4 hours and 8 minutes in a 15-week course. And this is 34 hours, you know, so 2 to 3 hours a week is all this student was doing. And then down here you have fractional amounts of time. So clearly this student isn't going to perform well. The other thing that just happened in the last day or two, this data empowers us to respond to students honestly and forthrightly. So this student contacts me and says, I worked so hard in this class, I did everything I could to do well, and I just didn't. And I'm sitting at a 59, and is there any way I can do more to push me over into the D- range? Because at Iowa State, there aren't any fail grades this semester. There's only pass and not pass. And so if the student can get to D-, they pass the course and they can move on without a hit to their GPA, and they still get the credits. So I look at this data and I say, well, first of all, let's be clear about what you did to succeed in the course. Spending 4 hours and 8 minutes on the homework for the entire semester is not an indication that you did everything you could do. Right? I would expect this to be at least maybe an hour a week or something. So right away, you can confront the student with honesty and make them see that there's a behavioral issue here, not just an aptitude issue, but you chose not to do this. And now you can't unring the bell. You can't go back and add the time here that would give you the kind of performance you needed to get the grade you needed. So no, I don't believe that you did do everything you could do to succeed. And so it empowers us to be honest with them using actual data as opposed to speculating about what might be going on with them. So this was a student that just chose not to do the work. There was nothing in their private life going on. They weren't caring for a sick parent or sick child or anything like that. The student just didn't do the work. So the other thing I use quite frequently is my course is mechanical component design. There's a very heavy focus on strength of materials, and that course is a prereq for my course, and it's foundational. We use that material throughout the course from day one until the final exam. And so early on in the semester, this was the very first assignment I gave them, and I assigned things from the Connect activities that would tell me if they're up to speed where they need to be. And frankly, it looks pretty darn good. They were, you know, they did pretty well. This one's low, probably ought to talk about why that wasn't successful. But then this one too, find principal, normal, and shear stresses. And having not done this before, I know full well that that is something that isn't focused on as much as it should be in the prerequisite course. And we've actually talked with faculty in that department about focusing more on this. So I look at this item analysis report and I can tell if my students are going to be prepared moving into the next topic. So this is their first attempt, and I think it was Joey that was talking about how much veracity are they putting into their response, how honest are they, or how good are they at self-assessing. And so I always take this first attempt as the purest one, the one that's telling me the best story. But then they do make the effort by the time they try first to move up and do a lot better in the second. So now the second attempt or the last attempt, they've learned or refreshed or reviewed what they needed to in order to go on and be successful for the remainder of the course. Because without this foundation, they're not going to do well. So that's how I've used, not just this semester, but in semesters past, this insight report has been tremendously powerful in helping me talk to students about behaviors, not just their aptitude, that are going to determine their success in the course. Quite frankly, most of them, it's been my experience, are pretty smart. They're smart enough, but I have to focus on the fact that that's not enough. It's sufficient condition, necessary but insufficient condition. So they need to include these behaviors that will ensure their success. And if you come to me on the last day of the term and say I did everything I could, and then I pull this graphic up and say, well, there you are right there. Only one student had less time than you did, and you're telling me you did everything you could, and I'm saying it doesn't appear to me that that's the case. So that's how I use Insight Report and the activity reports to tell, you kind of use as a diagnostic, if you will.
Thanks, Gloria. You know, I think that's really interesting. When we were talking, there are two comments. You mentioned that this semester, because of the way you were able to engage with the students, you feel like you got to know more students than you do even when you teach face-to-face during
true.
our pre-call. Can you share a little bit about maybe how data influenced that? And then the second question that I wanted to ask you to dig in a little bit is, and I think this applies through math or chemistry and engineering, which is prerequisites. The last 3 months of this semester are almost a wash, and you talked about pass and fail. Now you've got students moving into the next semester's class if they pass. How do you foresee needing analytics to help your class faster and stronger in the fall?
I think that's a really good question. I think the very first thing I'll do is put this exact same assignment out for what I basically use for diagnostics, and compare it to this semester's, because the students were in school until March, I think 10th or 17th, somewhere in there. Right after spring break, the governor of Iowa instructed the regents of the universities to close down all of the universities. So they were on campus for part of that semester. And they took that diagnostic while they were on campus. It'll be interesting to do that diagnostic again this fall to see if there was a significant impact due to kind of the holding, I don't want to say holding the bar lower, but at least it's been my experience that students will meet, if you raise the bar, they'll try to jump over the higher bar. If you lower the bar, they'll try to jump through the lower bar, unless they're just inherently good students. And in spite of what we may do or not do, they find a way to succeed. But it's these students down in here that you need to inform early. Look, you're not showing strength in the prerequisites. You're opening up the assignments just a few hours before they're due. And I'm just telling you right from day one that that's probably not going to make you successful in this course. And I can teach you the material related to the course, but I'm not going to call you at home and say, have you done your assignment yet? So there's this fine line between treating them like adults and kind of monitoring them to the point where you can motivate them to do more, because I'm looking at the data and I'm seeing what's going on. It's not like back in the old days where if you saw a student staring off into the distance, you might pull them aside and say, is there something going on? Is there something you want to talk to me about? And even then it was risky. They might be something totally unrelated to anything going on in class or any kind of problems they would be having in class. But now I can look at this before I approach the student, look at some of the data that's embedded here. If I click on these dots, more stuff comes out. The name of the student, how much time they're spending on the exercises. And you can start this, the data starts to be, there's enough data available about 3 weeks into the semester that you can start using it pretty early on. You don't have to wait midterm to start using this stuff. You can use it before even the quarter term starts, and give them a heads up that you need to do more. I'm aware of the fact that you're not doing everything successful. So you come to me at the last day of the term and say, I tried really hard. I'm going to pull this chart open and ask you to explain that to me in further detail, because it's not apparent in this chart that that's the case. So yes, looking at this at the beginning of the semester will be really interesting to see if there is an impact. And my gut is that yes, there will be an impact.
Thank you. I know we're coming up to the top of the hour and we had scheduled this to be 30 minutes. So for anybody that needs to jump off, I can appreciate that. If anybody has any questions, I'd love to open it up for Gloria also. Any comments or questions for Gloria? Okay. Anything else for Dan? Well, I hope this has been really helpful for you, and please let us know if this is something we're evaluating. We've done 3 of these different Elevate Online webinars. We're continuing to decide what we're going to do with it in June, if we're going to have a more regular cadence, all of these different elements. So please, if you have any feedback, let us know. And I just want to say special thanks to Dan and Gloria for joining us and facilitating today's conversation. We'll stay on the line until everybody who's an attendee has hung up. But thank you guys both for joining us, and faculty members for joining as well. I hope this was helpful and informative. You're welcome, Joey. Okay. Trish, oh, and Patricia's gone. Patricia's still on. So hi, Patricia. Oh, now you're gone. Okay. Thank you both very much for this. What are your thoughts about